Just this morning, again, a rocket was fired by Hamas from Beit Hanun inside the Gaza Strip toward Israel. Now, that rocket was destroyed in mid-flight by the vaunted Israeli air defense forces, but it demonstrates that a threat still emanates towards the people of Israel from the Gaza Strip, though in a reduced form. It's in that context that one has to see the operations taking place inside the Gaza Strip at the hands of the Israel Defense Forces. What we're witnessing is a staged, gradual, and readily and regularly assessed military operation to broaden and widen and deepen and intensify Israeli maneuvers inside Gaza with a view to achieving two goals. Number one is to drive Hamas back to the negotiating table. People will notice that the negotiations for the release of hostages and the return of hostages by Hamas to Israel, those negotiations are currently at something of a standstill. So what Israel is doing is it's having the IDF move gradually against various areas and strongholds inside the Gaza Strip. It's assessing the effectiveness of those military maneuvers when it comes to the goal of driving Hamas back to the negotiating table in order to bring our hostages home. The second goal of these maneuvers is the same goal as was stated in tandem with the aim of returning the hostages, namely to bring about a situation where never again will a threat emanate from the Gaza Strip against the people of Israel. So those threats take form in several different fashions. We know about the aerial threats that are manifested by way of rockets, such as the rocket fired this morning from Beit Hanun into Israel. We know about the overland threats, the storming of the border fence by the Gazans on October the 7th, and we know about the subterranean threat, namely the tunnels that have been excavated beneath the Gaza Strip, essentially bringing about a reality where there are two Gazans. There is the overland Gaza and there is the subterranean Gaza, a terror network of tunnels that is more extensive than the London underground network of rails. So when the Israel Defense Forces operates against the tunnels, it's because not all of those tunnels have yet been neutralized, despite the fighting that has endured since November of 2023. And it's because Israel has changed its policy. It used to be that the Israeli defense establishment viewed as tolerable the continued excavation of tunnels. Post-October 7th, it no longer views the construction and the steady moving toward an attack against Israel as a reality that can be tolerated. So the Israeli Defense Forces is acting in a very, very specific, staged manner to see whether or not it can bring about the two stated war goals. One of the things that people ought to know is that on April the 6th, 2018, Yahya Sinwar, who was then the leader of Hamas and the mastermind of the October 7th massacre, actually stated to a baying crowd inside the Gaza Strip, quote, "We," meaning the Gazans, "we have come out today and we will come out in the next few days, and our men will surprise the entire world with our big push against the border fence. We will take down the border with Israel and we will tear out the hearts of the Israelis." Yahya Sinwar stated that on April 6th, 2018. He brought that into a dreadful reality on October 7th, 2023. And that is the reason that never again will the approach of the Gazan populations toward the border fence be tolerated by the state and the security forces of Israel. It's very important that the Israel Defense Forces continues to widen what's been termed the perimeter, and that is the terrain that exists between the border fence that delineates Israel from the Gaza Strip and territory on the Gazan side of that border fence, about 1 kilometer deep into Gazan territory, wrapping itself along the north, the east, and the south of the Gaza Strip, including in the areas of Rafah. And the reason for that is that Israel is conveying a very clear message, not only to Hamas, but also to the Gazans who support Hamas. They are saying that on October the 7th, you sought to drive Israelis out of their homes in the southern towns of Sderot, in the southern kibbutzim of Kfar Aza, of Nachal Oz, of Nir Oz, of Be'eri, and elsewhere. And the result that you sought is not the result that you are going to meet with. In actual fact, it's going to be the opposite. Israelis and Israel is going to stand fast. And as long as you in Gaza hold our hostages and seek to drive us from our territories, we will move ever further into your territory. We will hold that territory and we will retain that territory until such time as our abductees come home and until such time as you in Gaza can never again constitute a threat against the people and the state of Israel. That goes for the area of Rafah, it goes for the area of Bet Hanun, and it goes for the entire perimeter surrounding the Gaza Strip, rightly so. The Israel Defense Forces has announced that it successfully eliminated Hassan Bdeir, a senior member of the Hezbollah terror organization. And Bdeir had a specific portfolio. He was responsible for issues relating to the Palestinian Arabs in the Gaza Strip and also in Judea and Samaria. And this individual, Hassan Bdeir, was dispatched by the Israeli Air Force in his apartment in Dahia, inside Lebanon, because he was in the midst of planning a terror attack against Israelis within the coming days who were visiting the island of Cyprus. So it's in light of the imminent, clear and present danger and threat that Bdeir really constituted that the Israeli Defense Forces decided to act correctly so, and they have eliminated him. In addition to that, there are warnings coming from the Israeli National Security Council to the effect that Iran, the Iranian regime, is planning to abduct and to kidnap Israelis and indeed Jews as they travel abroad during the Passover holy days. The Passover festival for the Jewish people begins on April 12th of this year. It's very common for Israelis and for Jewish people from all over the world to travel abroad and to make a vacation of this festival. And Iran has seen that as an opportune time to terrorize the Jewish people by launching abduction attempts against them wherever they may be. So Israel is facing threats against the Israeli people at home, as we know, but also abroad in Cyprus, in the case of Hassan Bdeir, and throughout the globe as they travel in order to revel in Passover festivities. Since the ceasefire agreement was ratified between Israel and Lebanon, Israel has clung to its declaration that it will not accept imminent threats against the Israeli people that are either launched from Lebanon into Israel or are masterminded by Hezbollah inside Lebanon against Israelis elsewhere in the world. So the elimination of Bdeir by the Israeli Defense Forces is absolutely in keeping with the declarations that accompanied the ceasefire. What people should be looking at when considering who is breaching the terms of the ceasefire and who is not is why are these terror attacks continuing? Why are they continuing to be attempted? And will the international community do what it ought to do and rally itself in order to condemn these actions and attempted actions by Hezbollah? The Israeli Defense Forces is going to continue to target for elimination anybody who seeks to harm the people of Israel within the borders of Israel or the Jewish people wherever they may be. And the reason for that is that a lesson learned in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre launched by Hamas, piled onto by Hezbollah, is that when our enemies state that they seek to do us harm, we must believe them, we must act against them, we must preempt them, and therefore anybody who represents the terror organization Hamas or Hezbollah or frankly any other has a target affixed firmly upon their back by the Israeli security forces, whether that be by way of maneuvering the Israel Defense Forces as a military force, or whether it be these more pinpoint eliminations and targeted eliminations that we're currently seeing. And that is the appropriate policy, and long should it continue, and I believe long will it continue. I think on the subject of America's force buildup and on the island of Diego Garcia and how it pertains to Iran, Donald Trump has repeatedly expressed his desire to strike a deal for Iran to dismantle its pursuits of nuclear weapons. But Iran's so-called supreme leader is very unlikely to place his faith in Donald Trump's assurances that the future of the Iranian regime is secure on condition that it abandons its nuclear weapons program. Now, listeners will recall that Muammar Gaddafi of Libya, for example, agreed to abandon his nuclear weapons program in 2003 under international pressure to do so. And yet on October the 20th, 2011, Gaddafi was lynched by a Libyan mob in the streets of the country he had ruled over with an iron fist. Iran's leaders will well recall that turn of events. Now, Donald Trump gave until the middle of May for Iran to enter into serious negotiations. And as we await that deadline, America is definitely flexing its military muscle in order to show that there is a credible military threat now taking shape, whose focus is trained on the dismantlement of Iran's nuclear weapons program. Now, there are two things to keep in mind here as we watch these events unfold. The first is that rogue states that possess nuclear weapons tend to endure. We've seen that in the case of North Korea, for example, and one could argue that we see it in the case of Russia. Rogue states that do not possess nuclear weapons tend to fall. Libya is a fine example of that, but also the Assad regime in Syria is a more recent example of that phenomenon. With that in mind, the Iranians recognize that all too well. And so they see the possession of nuclear arms as not only a threat toward their enemies, but as a life insurance policy for themselves. Beyond that, Iran's nuclear weapons program was historically shielded by what came to be called the Ring of Fire, which was essentially a hangman's noose placed around the neck of Israel by way of Iranian proxies hard-pressed at the border with the state of Israel, who were ready to launch a massive attack against Israel at the instruction of the Iranians. Part of the Iranian calculus has always been that Iran would be spared any attack, therefore, on its sovereign soil as a result of the potent non-state actors that it could action against Israel in such a scenario. But a lot has changed since October the 7th. Hezbollah and Hamas have both been decimated. The Houthis are now firmly the focus of the Americans, and Israel enjoys a far greater strategic alignment with the Trump administration than it did with the Biden administration, at least for now. And also, Iran broke the rules of the game by launching a kinetic military attack toward Israel's sovereign soil from Iranian sovereign soil by way of two massive attack waves involving hundreds of ballistic missiles. All of this is to say that the Ring of Fire has largely been extinguished. It's no longer what it once was. Kinetic attacks on enemies on sovereign soil are now part of the game as established by Iran. And so how close we are to seeing a strike against Iran is anybody's guess. And whether or not Israel will participate in such a strike is equally unclear. But what is absolutely beyond doubt is that Iran is incredibly exposed, more so now than ever before. Its missile capabilities against Israel have been demonstrated to be largely impotent. And if you're asking me my opinion, it remains unchanged. Iran's nuclear weapons program can be hit. It should be hit. I believe that Israel can do so unilaterally. I'm certain that Israel and America can do so in a coordinated fashion. And the sooner we rid the earth of Iran's nuclear weapons menace, the sooner the circle of normalization in the region can be broadened and calm can be restored to the Middle East as a whole. That is my hope.